So these three churches, each of them represents a different position in this big aesthetic conflict that I mentioned. One of them practices all popular music. One of them practices a mixture of popular and classical musics, and for want of a better word, world musics. And one of them practices pretty much all classical musics. And each of them does what they do very well. But the interesting thing is these different kinds of genres articulate with different notions of public and private in the worship service. The two churches that practice traditional music as part of their congregational life, their church services have a flexible and unscripted quality. In particular, they both have a part of the service where members of the church will talk about what's going on in their personal lives. They'll talk about if they have an aunt that's gotten sick. They'll talk about if they had tried to get a promotion at their job and they failed to get it. They might even tell you why. So these are parts of the church service that the leaders told me are private. They're private, maybe not for the sort of ephemeral stream of visitors that might come in or out of a church like this, but for the unseen audience of folks that might access an internet-based video archive where you could later, 10 years later, find out why Joe's uncle didn't get his job. They didn't want people to know that. So they said, fine, you can take these things and submit them to the archive, and in fact they might be useful to us, but please edit out all of those sections that have to do with sharing. The popular music oriented church had a much more scripted quality to the service. They were very media savvy. They had sort of meta commentaries going on with video all the time. They had a band with a really wonderful jazz singer. They had a preacher who used PowerPoint with video and other kinds of media as sort of punctuation points for his preaching. So in some ways, you would imagine that a service like this is constructed as a very public occasion. It is in a sense already mediated, but these folks were also concerned about having something situated in a local archive where members of their church could go and access it. They were concerned about it because they were very engaged with the life of folks in their congregation, and they knew several families that had issues or dynamics that they wouldn't want represented on film, but who really wanted to be there and were, of course, there as part of this worshiping congregation. So for them, the notion of public and private didn't have to do with the liturgical structure, didn't have to do with time, it had to do with space. It had to do with where the camera was pointed and whom it was recording. So what they asked me to do was film everything with a wide shot. Now in each case I asked the churches where I could set up my gear so that it would be out of the way of people, so that it wouldn't be distracted, and each of them gave me advice on this. But in this particular congregation, these were the most explicit instructions that I got, and I really appreciated them. I put it right in the back of the congregation, I set a wide shot, and afterwards I consulted with the pastoral team of the congregation to find out if I had recorded anything that wouldn't be welcomed as a public representation of the church or its members. So just to return to this idea of the archive, this is really the pivot point around which all of my decisions centered. How could I take this mediated stuff and make it useful to people? How could I take these audio and video recordings and make it useful to people? And at least in this case, it had a lot to do with talking to folks and finding out what they conceptualized as public and private.